Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be getting into our wide receiver tier here, and we're going to look at a couple guys, rankings, how good we feel about their matchups and their prospects for Week 11. The first guy we're going to talk about here is Cedric Tillman.
Over the last 3 weeks, he went 8 for 81, 7 for 99, and 2 touchdowns, 6 for 75, and a touchdown. That's 32 targets over the last 3 weeks. This week, they go on the road against the Saints in what's kind of a revenge game for Jameis Winston. I know we talked about him in the quarterback episode, how we do like him this week. We know Winston's going to throw it 40-plus times per game, and even if there's a lot of mouths to feed on this offense, I think you can still expect 8+ targets per game for Tillman. And with Tillman, he just looks really good. We know it took him a little bit to come on, but he was a third-round pick out of Tennessee in 2023. Kind of fell in the draft. He only played 6 games his senior year due to injuries, but coming into his rookie season, Steve Smith had him as his top sleeper in the class. And do you know what Randy Moss said about him?
I don't know. What did you say?
Randy Moss said, "This is the best young receiver to enter the NFL in the past 15 years, and it's not even close," which I was very surprised by. I hadn't heard that before, so clearly he's getting some praise or has gotten some praise from...
I mean, that's just objectively not true, though.
I agree.
Why
I
did
totally
he say that?
agree.
What was the context?
I don't know.
I need to look that up now.
I don't know.
God, that's crazy.
I was just as shocked as you were. So I guess the point being, he's a solid player, right? And we're finally seeing that on the field. Cooper's gone. That really paved the way for him to be the number one. This week, against the Saints, we know the Saints are just a bad defense all around. They got rid of their top cornerback who would have kind of bodied up Tillman in a way. So I think it's just wheels up for Tillman this week. I'm really excited for him.
Yeah, in this matchup against New Orleans, he should be able to do very well. I would definitely be having him in starting lineups. I feel like the industry hasn't quite caught up. It's almost like they can't understand or fathom the fact that Cooper gets traded, and instead of having one of the other guys that actually was already on the field playing be the number one, that Tillman's the number one. The guy that had sitting behind everybody, just leapfrogs everybody and gets slotted straight into Cooper's role. But because on Sleeper, he's projected at 9 points in half PPR. It's dude, come on, we're past that point now, right? We're let's get him up into that top 20, 15 type of projection up at 11 points. I don't know that it's crazy to consider playing him over CeeDee Lamb, which I think is something that obviously 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago we would have never been saying. But that's kind of where I think he's at for this matchup here, right? I'm not entirely sure long term how much appeal he has, right? Cooper, who's an established, very good player, was very poor the first 6 weeks, and he was not good with Watson. So if they're going to go back to Deshaun Watson next year, or I don't know, who knows what the quarterback is, but while it's Winston and while Tillman is his number one target, I think you keep letting it ride too. The one thing I will say about Tillman in terms of expectations, right, is his numbers would look a lot different if the games ended at the 2-minute warning. So I do want to highlight, he had 7 for 99 and 2 touchdowns, but he caught a 38-yard touchdown in week 8 against Baltimore to kind of ice the game away. So he was at 6 for 70 or 6 for 65 before that. And then he caught an 18-yard touchdown at the end of the Charger game in garbage time. So, that would have been 5 for 60 would have been his stat lines, right? So again, that's not the case. So I don't want to just diminish what he's done, but I do want to just put a little bit of cold water on it that now that you're going to rely on him as a starter and he goes out and goes 5 for 50, it really wouldn't be that different if they get contained at the end of the game. So, as much as I am high on him, if he does something like that, don't be entirely surprised, just because I think defenses are going to start shifting. They just came off a bye, so it's, the offense might look a little different than we're expecting.
I think that's fair, but I will say too, with rest of season, there's going to be a lot of garbage time.
Yeah, and honestly, the receivers right now, we have so many bad receivers. so many situations that have gotten worse, so many injuries that have impacted these guys. I mean, we're talking about CeeDee Lamb around wide receiver 20, 15. We're talking about Tyreek Hill, even with Tua back down in the wide receiver 15. Jalen Waddle is completely useless. Like, guys additionally have gotten hurt, right? We have like T. Higgins that's out with injury. We have all of these things with receivers and just underperforming. And so, when you get a guy that's doing well, how about you just put him in your lineup and, you'd be happy and you kind of push him up the rankings. Moving on to another guy who's been playing significantly better over the last 3 weeks. His target share has been up a ton as well, even though the 2 weeks before that he didn't play so well, but that's Calvin Ridley. He just had 5 for 85 and 2 touchdowns after 5 for 73 and a 10 for 143 games. So he's finally picking it up. We had high hopes for Ridley coming into the season. Obviously, we've talked about that a ton. We've talked about how disappointed we've been, but since they moved on from DeAndre Hopkins, it's been a massive target share for Ridley, massive total targets for Ridley, and I think moving forward, we should be able to expect more of the same. But in this week, he gets Minnesota, which, is a good matchup for wide receivers. He should be able to be the focal point of the offense again. He should be able to get open and get his during this game. I would expect, between 8 and 12 targets in this game. So a very high volume day for him. And throughout the rest of the season, he's just got a great schedule. I mean, we talked about it with Levis, and Ridley has that same schedule. So I do think that Ridley could be in for a huge second half coming down the stretch here for the rest of the year.
Remember a few weeks ago when I told you how embarrassed I was that he was my most drafted wide receiver in best ball?
Yeah, I think you said that after week 7. After you had that 8 target, 0 catch game and then a 9 target, 3 catch game, you're like, dude, this is not good.
I was like, I have to get something off my chest. Like, I just feel terrible about this. And now I'm kind of excited about that with this schedule. And, in this game, like you mentioned with the Vikings, like, they're really tough to run the ball against as much as Tennessee wants to establish the run. And I think with Spears coming back healthy, that will definitely help in that regard. But either way, even if it's a close matchup, like Ridley is clearly the focal point. So he's going to get 8 to 12 targets in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you have Ridley, he's locked and loaded at this point, especially in 3 wide receiver leagues. Just keep him in your lineups, right? Like there's nobody else there. Levis is going to be continuing to try and chuck it deep. He's going to continue to try and show what he can do. I do think that they're ready to move on from Levis after this season because their team is not that good. But, he still has the rest of this year to kind of show what he can do. And I think Ridley is going to be a major sticking point for him. Next guy we want to get into here is Lad McConkey. So we have him ranked behind Ridley and Tillman this week, but he goes up against the Bengals. And I do think that this is going to be more of a shootout style game than last week against Tennessee when they were just kind of kicking the crap out of them. So, it's one of those things where I do think that he's going to be more needed.
Yeah, and with Lad, I mean, he's obviously coming off a disappointing week, right? Like he only had 2 catches. Luckily, one of them was for a big gain, and he ended up with 52 yards. But Herbert didn't throw much in this game. He only completed 14 passes, only threw it 18 times. This week, it's going to be a much different game plan, like you mentioned, against the Bengals. They're going to put up points on the Chargers. I know the Chargers defense has been good, but I think this whole game plan is really going to be revolved around Justin Herbert throwing the ball. And although Quentin Johnston's been a nice story, he's been extremely efficient. Like Lad is the true cut number 1 in this offense. So I think for this game, he's been getting between 6 and 8 targets per game, but I think in this one, we're going to finally see him get to double digits for the first time on the year. Good news is the Bengals are giving up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks. They're giving up a lot of points to wide receivers. So I really like Lad in this one.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think Lad we could see finally get over that double digit target game. I think that would be awesome to see here against the Bengals. They're going to have to throw a ton. And so, they're not going to be up 27-10 like they were last week. So I think it's pretty safe to go straight back to Lad. Obviously Tillman and Ridley above him just because their roles seem to be a little bit more stable and solidified. But Lad, somebody that we still very much like this week. And honestly, just moving forward in general, I think he's a great player. Stoked that the Chargers have him instead of like Jalen Polk, who ended up on New England, who was the player that they traded for. Going over now to the next guy that we want to talk about, the last guy of this group of 4 in this, mid wide receiver 2, kind of down to maybe beginning of wide receiver 3 range, is Courtland Sutton. So another guy, 3 weeks now where he's had 30 targets. and he's looked great, right? 8 for 100. He had 7 for 122. This past week didn't get to 100 yards, but he had 6 for 70 and a touchdown. And so it really feels like he's stepped up into a more stable role. Bo Nix is looking much more comfortable in the offense. He's looking much better overall. They go up against Atlanta this week, who they should be able to score on. We just saw MVS go crazy against them. So, I mean, Courtland Sutton should at least be able to put together a solid game here. Goes up against the Raiders the following week. Like, you're just locking Courtland Sutton into your lineup now again. And that's not something we thought, again, a couple weeks ago that we thought we'd be saying after he had that 0-point week. I think he goes starting to maybe get cut in some leagues after that, and then just comes out and is immediately productive again through this stretch of the schedule. So Courtland Sutton, somebody I'm excited to be playing, especially in 3 wide receiver leagues. You got to make sure you get him into your starting lineups.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that you said was, about Bo Nix improving, right? Because the relationship between Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton kind of reminds me of Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin, right? Like, obviously Daniels had a tough go his first 2 weeks. McLaurin obviously was part of that too, or kind of was the unfortunate beneficiary of that. And Daniels got going in week 3 and here on out, but Bo Nix now is kind of on that same trajectory. Maybe not quite as good, but is really elevating his game as a passer, and Sutton is really reaping the benefits of that. And like you mentioned with MVS, who's everyone's favorite waiver wire target this week, who's just probably going to be a drop next week. I guess I could digress on that a little bit, but like you mentioned with Sutton, like he's getting his 9 to 11 targets per game these last 3 weeks. Like I really like him this week against the Falcons.
Yeah, exactly. And why even do a waiver wire episode when MVS is the most exciting player? Like, we already have seen this stance before. We don't need to go down that path. But yeah, so Sutton, great player. So we have this tier ranked: Tillman, Ridley, Ladd, Sutton, but we like all of them as starters in 3 wide receiver leagues. Should have good matchups, all good players to go and get if you think that you can acquire one of these guys in any of your leagues. Very excited about this tier and this group of wide receivers that has been ranked much lower throughout this first half of the season. All of them, right? But over the last 3 weeks, they've all really stepped up. All have kind of vaulted themselves into that top 25 conversation. So we just wanted to highlight them in that light and make sure that everybody listening realizes how much better these fantasy assets are than they were a month ago. The last player we want to talk about doesn't have quite the track record necessarily of these other guys over the last 3 weeks, but the sleeper alert for this episode is going to be Ricky Pearsall. We just saw him catch a long touchdown coming out of the bye week. We talk about rookies kind of elevating their roles in the offense, and without Ayuk, without making a trade, Pearsall was able to get on the field a bunch, and he made an impact, right? 6 targets, had the long touchdown, scored a bunch of points. I don't necessarily think he's going to score a ton every single week, but going up against Seattle, they should have to throw quite a bit. I'm hoping that this game has some back and forth, and Pearsall, I think, has shown that he could be a decently reliable target for Purdy. So the problem with him is he could be all the way down to like the number 5 option in the passing game during any given week, but also he could be the number 2 passing game option. So, you just have to kind of hope you hit on those weeks where he's good if you decide to play him. And I think this week could be one of those times.
Yeah, I think for a sleeper specifically, like what I'm looking for if I'm, have bye week issues, injury issues, things like that, in a position where I would play Pearsall is like, is he a talented player? Yes. Is he on an elite offense? Yes. So I think for him in this situation, like I'd be fine taking a flyer on him. I think for like daily fantasy or things like that is a good play this week. But like you mentioned, like he could get 3 targets in this game too. But if it's kind of a boom bust desperation play, like I like him this week.
All right, with that, thank you so much for listening. We look forward to seeing the next one. If you're still here with us, hit that subscribe button. Still on our way to 325, small channel. We would really appreciate the support and look forward to talking to you the next one.
Later.